Hello, hello.
Hello and welcome. I see that Minister Joly has joined us, so we'll get started. First of all, everyone, welcome. And welcome, Minister Joly. We're very grateful that you're taking the time to chat with us, and I know that you spoke with Moncton yesterday and Fredericton earlier today as well. So thank you on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce movement on speaking to us and taking the time. I would like to welcome Member of Parliament. Wayne Long is on the line, and I know that Wayne has been very, very busy and hectic helping our business community as well as the residents of our community to get through this pandemic. So we're very happy to have you join us, and we're working very well with Wayne as well as we move through this. We're hosting with Economic Development Greater St. John tomorrow in Donna Maserow a session as well that will complement this session. So we look forward to that tomorrow, Wayne. As well, now the way we'll start is Deirdre Wade, who is the chair of our St. John Chamber of Commerce, and she's a partner with Cox and Palmer. She will bring greetings and welcome everyone. Our moderator is Dean Mullen.
Say you have a solution that works.
And Dean Mullen is partnered with Jameson Mullis, and he's the vice chair as well as the treasurer. And he will
David, we need to get people to
mute
their phones.
Yeah, that was next on my list, was housekeeping. If people could mute their phones, because we're having issues with some background noise. So if you could put your phone on mute and then unmute it when you wish to speak, and then that would help. That also helps with bandwidth too, so I've been told. So I am going to turn it over to Deirdre Wade, who is the chair of the St. John Region Chamber of Commerce, and she's going to welcome everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the members, the Board of Directors, and the staff of the St. John Region Chamber of Commerce, I'm pleased to welcome the Honourable Melanie Joly, Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, to today's webinar, focusing on the federal government's business support plans, including the emergency wage subsidy, implemented as a result of the significant economic upheaval that has been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As David has said, this webinar will proceed with remarks by the Minister, followed by a question and answer session to be moderated by Dean Mullen. And with that brief introduction, I will turn the session over to Minister Joly.
Thank you. Thank you both for your warm welcome. It's great to have the chance to talk to you all and to answer your questions. And of course, I would like to acknowledge the presence on this Zoom, because now Zoom is a word and a verb. Of Wayne Long, obviously our colleague, esteemed colleague from St. John's, and also my parliamentary secretary, Renard Senot, who is also from New Brunswick and is my parliamentary secretary helping me with ACOA. So I thought as a starter, to really talk about what's the reading of the federal government of this crisis, what are our priorities, and then go into taking questions and being able to answer. So the first and foremost, and I think everybody will agree with me, the priority of the government right now is to make sure that we're flattening the curve, that people are abiding by the different strict measures set forward by our public health authorities. And while they're following these measures, that they're not too preoccupied about paying the rent, paying their mortgages, or putting food on the table. So as much as we're able to flatten the curve on the, making sure our healthcare system is able to cope with the spread of the virus, and at the same time, we're able to flatten the curve in terms of the economic impact of the containment measures, well, that's our biggest economic measure. As short the social distancing, physical distancing measures can last, the better. So that's our first priority. Second priority is obviously to have a people's first approach. and expanding massively the social safety net. So like I was saying, there is already a lot of anxiety. And so we needed to find ways very quickly without creating new programs and using our public service that is all teleworking like all of us. We needed to use existing programs to apply them and help people make ends meet. So we decided to expand massively the EI program. And that became the new CERB, Canada's Emergency Response Benefit. It's the now famous $2,000 per month benefit. And if you're self-employed and you lost contracts because of COVID-19, if you didn't have enough hours accumulated under EI, and you've been laid off, if you're a parent and your child is at home because school is off, you have access to CERB. And if you have COVID-19, you're sick, or you're taking care of somebody that is sick, obviously all that to say you have access to CERB. And that was our way to make sure that people had access to solutions. And obviously I'll be able to take any questions about the ways CERB can apply to people. That's the first thing. Second thing we did in the context of supporting people was to increase the Canada Child Benefit by $300 more per child, per children, and also we've increased the GST tax credit. So if you receive checks recently, you know people that have received increased amount by mail or through bank transfer, it's the GST transfers. So that's for our people's first approach. And finally, the third priority of the government was making sure we could help our businesses and come up with our economic package. Now, at the beginning, our reading at the federal level was that there would be a movement in the demand, and while supply would still be there. And we had to help businesses as they didn't necessarily have as many revenues as usual. And we had to help them bridge that gap and access to liquidity. And so that's why we decided to work at first with the banking sector, and we changed some regulations to make sure to deploy $300 billion of liquidity through our chartered banks and our credit unions. And meanwhile, the Bank of Canada was also reducing its key indicator. So we were able to get from banks the, basically the fact that they would become more flexible, they would reduce interest rates, they would make sure that they could defer in time repayments. And that's what we got from the CEOs of our chartered banks. Now, if that's not the case, if that's not happening in St. John's, I would like to know. I think we've received positive comments. We've also received negative comments about how banks are dealing with, risks right now, and dealing with allowing more loans and changing potentially the different modality of loans. So if I could get that feedback, that would be very, very, very useful from your members, from David and from you. So that's my first point regarding the question of liquidity. And then as the crisis was evolving, we saw that it was much more than a liquidity issue. We had to go and move into a subsidy approach because the burn rate of businesses was so high that we had to go and look into the issue of quick supply. And that's why we came up with a new wage subsidy approach, whereby you have access to 75% of your wages up to $58,700 for a given salary. And in order to have access to that, you have to show 30% of losses, and I can answer questions about that as well. So we came up with the wage subsidy. We came up with GST and custom duties and all other types of federal duties and payments deferral in time. And we came up also with CEBA, with the Canadian Emergency bank account, which is essentially $40,000 bank loans, which are interest-free, which can also be converted into a $10,000 subsidy if people pay back within 2 years. So that was our approach for also small businesses. So I know that there's still issues also with this $40,000 loan, and I can take questions about that too. And finally, through our work at ACOA, we decided to make sure that any interest-free loans that we procure to people would be, their repayments would be deferred in time, and we would be showing maximum flexibility through ACOA. So that's what we've done. And obviously we try to go as fast as possible, bearing in mind that it can't be perfect because we're dealing with an imperfect situation. So we're covering 80% of cases now, knowing that there's 20% of cases that we need to deal with. And that's exactly why I'm having this call with you, having this video conference to understand what are the cases that are not covered, giving that feedback to the Minister of Finance, answering questions, and at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people can have access to our measures. So here we go. I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce Dean Mullen, as I said, who is the Vice Chair and Treasurer. Dean is going to moderate. We have a number of questions that we've received from our guests on the line today. So Dean, I'll turn it over to you for the questions. And I realize some of these that the Minister may have addressed here, and Dean, I will leave it to you to ask the questions and moderate.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, David, and thank you, everybody. And Minister Joly, thank you for taking the time. The way things are moving during this time, if you take a 5-minute break, you miss 10 announcements. So we'll get right into the questions and hopefully work through them. So these, as David said, these are questions that were received from people on the call and as well as our members. So the first one, with respect to the CERB, once employees have applied and completed the 14-day waiting period, are they able to return to work with reduced hours and stay on the benefit? And also, if employees are on the CERB, can they refuse work to stay on the CERB? Okay, so
if you would have asked me this question before 12:15 your time rather than 11:15 my time, I would have told you if a person is on CERB, that person can't work. And that person must have lost its job, basically. Now, as of today, it's up to a person is able to earn $1,000 per month while being on CERB. So it's really for, I'll give you an example. In many smaller towns, there are voluntary fire workers. And sometimes they earn a bit of money when they go and do their work for the city, but it's not their full-time job. So that's just an example. And so we didn't want to penalize these people. And so basically it's up to $1,000 you're able to earn while being on CERB. So that's your first question. Second question, whether a person on CERB is able to say to its former employer, no, I don't want to go back. Well, yes, that person doesn't have a relationship anymore with its employer. That being said, you know, CERB will have an end. It will not last forever. And what we encourage people to do is use the wage subsidy and people to go back and work for, you know, for their former employers or for businesses. Some jurisdictions, some provinces have helped businesses to by providing some extra help for certain types of jobs, including essential services, to make sure that they could, you know, basically top up their salaries while dealing with the wage subsidy. But that's not the case for New Brunswick yet. And the other thing I wanted to mention is when an employer decides to use the wage subsidy, well, after laying off people, well, that employer can rehire again. And at the federal level, we will reimburse any EI contribution that had to be done or any Canada Pension Plan contribution that had to be done. And we'll be reimbursing that 100%. So basically it doesn't cost you anything to rehire.
Okay, just to thank you. Now, that $1,000, is that on top of it? So they can keep the 2,000 plus earn 1,000?
Yeah.
And the 1,000's a hard limit. Like if it's 1,005, they lose the 2,000.
As of 12/15 today.
Okay, so but the $1,000, if they happen to earn $1,005, they will lose the 2,000. It's a hard cap.
It's $1,000. That's the information I have for you right now.
Okay. Our next question is on, will there be any incentives for businesses that adapt and innovate at this time to try to stay afloat? We have various examples around around St. John, New Brunswick, and probably right across Canada of people incurring additional costs to modify how they deliver their product, how they are interacting with their customers, their clients, and whatnot. So is there any thought about any incentives to help businesses adapt to this new reality?
Well, we've seen Irving Oil retool. That was a good example. Many other businesses, they've been supported by ACOA to make sure that they could develop what is well known now as PPE, personal protective equipment, from hand sanitizer to masks. And we've been supporting many businesses in Atlantic Canada to do that. And Nova Scotia as well, Stanfield, which maybe you've heard about. But this is what we've done. And they are contributing to the, let's say, war efforts that we need to be deploying as we are combating the spread of COVID-19. So that's what we've done. But for the rest, we've been really targeting about stabilizing the economy and stabilizing the, stopping the bleeding.
Okay. Now, thank you. Now with this next question is looking at the next phase of this is getting businesses ramped back up. So will there be any programs to assist businesses when it's time to ramp up and return to work? For example, subsidies and funding are going to be just as important then as they are now, because ramping up and a gradual return to full capacity is going to be the norm, not the exception. And we could see other periods of self-isolation that we're going to turn on, that we're going to have to turn off for a bit and turn back on just as the ebbs and flows. Is there any consideration from the federal government towards helping businesses cope on the startup phase?
Okay, different things. The wage subsidy is, for 3 months. So it's March, April, and May. Should the pandemic last longer, it will last longer. Okay, so, and every month you have to make sure that you show that you've incurred 30% of losses. So let's say you have had a 30% loss in April, and maybe May is better, but it's every month. So that can, if your revenues are not there because you're basically working on ramping up, and you're incurring more costs, and therefore you need the employees, you still have access to the wage subsidy. I don't have a clear answer for your question right now, because it's not as if there's a measure right now for this recovery and stimulus package. We're all about stabilization. Now, there will be a stimulus package and we will be working on recovery. Obviously, ACOA will be working on this as the key agency. And once I have that information, I will be able to provide it to you.
Okay, and thank you for that answer. I don't know, or no is an answer, so I appreciate that. To that point, so I guess from that sake, can we expect in 2020 that there will be something in terms of economic stimulus, specifically in form of the infrastructure program, or and what timing might we see that similar to 2008 when it was a driver to recovery of the economy?
Okay, so obviously, the stimulus package tends to use infrastructure as a good way to stimulate the economy. We already had a very strong infrastructure plan, and we know that we have to play catch up when it comes to our infrastructures in the country. So it makes sense to think that infrastructure would be part of a stimulus package. That being said, we can compare this this crisis to 2008. 2008 was a financial crisis. Right now, we're in a real economy crisis where there's a contraction of the economic activity and people are not working. And so our reaction will have to be different based on the fact that we will be looking at what our public health officials and experts are telling us as we're ramping up and starting again our economy. And so based on that, our economic stimulus will be supporting certain sectors and not others. What we know is that we will want to have a greener economy. And we know also that that more we have people on wage subsidies, the better. Because wage subsidies are the best way to make sure that people can start again and work. And so everything we're doing in terms of measures right now will have an impact on the type of stimulus that we'll be bringing up. We already also know, and the Prime Minister has said it even yesterday, there are a couple of sectors that will have, that we're looking as pinpoint because they're more impacted than others. Oil and gas being one, the tourism sector being another, and airline carriers. So these were the ones that were mentioned by the Prime Minister. So I've provided you all the information I've had.
Okay, thank you. Now, you said, just to step back a second, you said about the subsidy, the 75% is for 3 months, and if it needs to go on longer, it will go on longer. Is there any contemplation or any consideration what will be the triggers to mean that, to show that it will go on longer? If the country is still on full lockdown, or if it's just partial, what might be looked at to determine whether it will be extended beyond the 3 months?
Well, I don't know if you have a crystal ball, but I don't have one. So what I can tell you now is that should there be still full lockdown, obviously we'll be there to help. If that's not the case, well, things will be different. If there's a partial lockdown, well, the companies that will be able to show 30% of losses will therefore, be allowed. So that's how it works right now. The vast majority of provinces have said that they would be in full lockdown until the beginning of May. And so based on that, we now know that the wage subsidy is for 3 months. Let's remember that CERB is for 4 months. So CERB was for March, April, May, and June. And so that's why there's a discrepancy, and that's why we're more open to talk about the month of June potentially for the wage subsidy. Okay.
Now for the staying on the wage subsidy, the criteria that was passed on Saturday evening and talking about the 15% in March compared to previous periods, and the complexity that obviously accompanies anything like this. Was there any consideration towards perhaps easier ways of doing it? Some of our members have said are concerned about the number one, about the amount of effort it will be to make sure that everything is kept in to support the subsidy, and also concern about if they make a mistake, there's very strong penalties that took up a lot of the legislation on if somebody abuses it, and hopefully there's going to be some consideration there for if somebody just makes a mistake, which normally is the case. But was there any consideration towards an easier way to apply the 75%?
This is the first time we do a wage subsidy in this country. It's the biggest economic measure of our history. All countries that have done a wage subsidy have came up afterwards with some tweaks to it. That was certainly the case for New Zealand. New Zealand at the beginning was putting a cap of $150,000 per business in terms of wage subsidy allowed, and 3 days later they had to change it. So it just shows that we're building the plane as we fly it, and that's the reality of this pandemic. Now the other thing also is we want to make sure not only that people use the wage subsidies, but we know that there are still things that we need to tweak in the wage subsidy program. It's still not perfect, and so if there are cases of I'm very much aware that the seasonal businesses, the 30% of loss is more difficult to show. Startups, we've made some tweaks. Some startups are better than they used to be, but there are still some startups that need to be, their circumstances need to be looked into. And at the end of the day, just to give you the question, the legislators' intent, so our government's intent, is definitely not to relive what we've seen in 2008, when following 2008, lots of dividends were given to banks executives and options, and disproportionate salaries were given, and people within the American public became extremely frustrated because banks had just been bailed out. And so that created a lot of polarization, like political polarization, with Occupy Wall Street on the on the left side, and Tea Party on the right side. And so we don't want to increase inequalities after this. We are there as a government to help, because we know that businesses are going through tough times and we need to have employees having a job. But our goal is really to make sure that things are fair and that people are not taking taking the system for granted and using it to their own benefit. So that's
right. Okay, then I think that no one will argue with you that abuse should be dealt with, but mistakes should be in a different category.
That's it. And so my advice to everybody watching is really work with your accountant. Work with your accountant and your lawyer, but particularly your accountant, to do things well. And they have their own responsibility to make sure that they do things well too. So that's the best way. But we all agree that we can never take for granted. Let's never underestimate the Canada Revenue Agency. We know that.
I don't know how to answer that one, but I'll move on. For the wage subsidy, it's helpful, and it's going to be very beneficial for the wages and the salary and the people costs. Our members are also concerned about the other costs that have increased for staying open, like for supplies, increased labors because of higher ratio, higher labor costs, bonus pay. I know quite a few organizations that are paying a bonus for their employees to working during this time. Has there been any consideration of, so the question is, shouldn't an essential service that has remained open have access to assistance based on the COVID-induced increase in costs, and as well as the COVID-induced loss of revenue? Is there any consideration for the additional costs that people are incurring?
Okay, there's different things.
Yep.
We know we have an issue with fixed costs, but that's for businesses that are actually not in operations right now, because their burn rate is really high and they have no revenues coming in. I don't think your question is about that. You're talking about more, but if you allow me, I would like to talk about that, because I think a lot of your members are going through this right now. And that's the issue with rent. And that's the issue with, equipment leases and etc. Other provinces have decided to support more rent payments. PEI has done it, Nova Scotia has done it, New Brunswick has not done it yet. And I understand from my conversations today with the Moncton Chamber of Commerce and also with the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce that you guys are all signing a letter to ask from your provincial government to have more support in terms of rent and other fixed costs. at the federal level, this is something we're also looking at. We're looking at a way to potentially address the issue of fixed costs. The Prime Minister has mentioned it again today in his address. So that's what I can tell you right now. But we know that in businesses that are not in the service sector, for example, where, you know, in the service sector, wages is usually your biggest expense. In the manufacturing sector, wages can be a big expense, but usually it's more equipment or, you know, your inventory. And so that's why we want to address that. Now, for essential services that don't have 30% losses, I don't have a good answer for you. What I know is other jurisdictions, such as Quebec, has decided that they would be topping up the salaries for essential workers. So if you, in that jurisdiction, and you can hear from my accent that that's where I come from, you know, what's available for essential workers is basically they have their salaries and the provincial government adds money. So in order for them to not go on CERB but continue working. Is that something that New Brunswick would love to do? I think this is a good question to ask your provincial government.
Okay. Now, I think and thank you for that. I think the crux of the question was that in a situation like a grocery store, which is in New Brunswick considered available and essential to stay open, they're incurring a lot of additional costs for extra staff, the extra cost of cleaning, the supplies and whatnot. I think the question is driving at, is there, the fixed costs are great, but there's also the operational costs. And the example that this gentleman used, or customer used, or client, whatever, was that the revenue may be 80% of normal, but their costs have gone up 30%. So now they're actually 50% of where they were, but they're not going to get access to the wage subsidy, and they're more out of pocket than ever before. So they're trying to, like, is there anything there that they can, any conversation or contemplation on something in that regard?
Well, I think at this point, it's really a liquidity issue also, because if they have to deal with the fact that they have the more costs, if then it's a good conversation to have with your banker. But you know, there's so many business right now that are in dire states because they just have no revenues. Well, we're trying to prioritize them.
Okay. It was the recent announcement on the Canada Summer Jobs Program is that there's 100% wage subsidy for employers. It appears that it only applies to small businesses. Mm-hmm. Is this program, is it possible for this program to be expanded to medium and large businesses as well?
Well, that's a decision up to Wayne in St. John's, because it's really dealt by local MPs that decide where these Canada jobs, summer jobs, are allocated to. Usually they're more allocated to non-for-profits than businesses. And so, and usually it is really to provide good jobs for young students, but also to help the non-for-profit sector while they need support. And what I can tell you at the federal level is we will be paying for 100% of their salaries. So that's good news. But on the ground in St. John's, it will be Wayne taking the decision. So I send him all my support. Okay.
And one last question, or I guess comment. You had said about part of the stimulus that you'll make sure that the part you made a comment about our greener economy. Just in St. John, we have a resource base with the refinery and with the pulp mills, and just hope that we're not forgetting about our industries that are also important to the backbone of Canada as well as New Brunswick, that not only green are looked at, but overall, like everything, the whole meal deal.
Of course, and that's why I told you at the beginning that the oil and gas sector has been extremely impacted, and we're very much aware of that. Good news, there was a deal that was struck with the producing countries to try to stabilize markets. So Seamus O'Regan, the Minister of Natural Resources, has been working a lot on that. But we know that the price of the Canadian barrel has never been so low. And we're very much aware of that. And we know that's impacting a lot of people's lives and livelihood across this country.
Okay, very good. Well, David, those are the questions that were submitted. Did you want to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for everyone that was able to submit questions to us. And thank you as well, Melanie Joly, our Minister Melanie Joly, and your team. I know that you would have researched a lot to find some answers to these questions. Just as a theme going through, I'm sensing, a great deal of agility and an awareness of the frustrations that the business community is facing. And I thank you for your understanding of those issues and challenges and your desire to really work through with the business community. Just a further comment on the commercial rent and lease subsidies, as you had mentioned. We worked very closely with Fredericton Moncton as well, and did lobby the provincial government very, very hard for some kind of relief efforts on that front. Again, with the financial situation that the province is, I'm not sure that that's going to be real forthcoming. So we would like to urge you to put that at the front of your efforts as well, as some kind of a relief for the fixed costs. Since we did have all of the questions submitted, but we do have some time, with your permission, if there's a question from the floor, we do have time to take a couple, if that's all right with you. I understand your schedule is very, very tight.
Yes, David, and if Wayne could be able to say a few words after my closing remarks, it would be very helpful, very useful.
Wonderful. So we can do that now. Wayne, if you would like to address everyone on the thing. I know you're working very, very hard as well, and we thank you for all of your efforts. So before Deirdre gives us the closing remarks on behalf of the Chamber, Wayne, thank you. I invite you to speak and fill us in.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. It's great to be on the call. I know many of us were on the same kind of call yesterday, and I think we're on a call again tomorrow, but it's great to have the minister here to answer questions from members of the Chamber in the Greater St. John area. We're working here in the office. As I said yesterday, we're practicing our social distancing, but we've got 5 people in here literally answering hundreds of questions per day. To the minister's point, these programs aren't perfect. I'm very proud of what we're doing as a government. I'm very proud of these programs, but they do need to be tweaked. They do need feedback from great organizations, David, like the Chamber, and Ron with Ed St. John, and so on and so forth, because we need that feedback from people like you who are living it, who are on the front lines, so then we can go back on our conference calls and talk about how we can do fixes. And as Melanie just said, over the last 30 minutes, the Prime Minister just announced some changes with respect to, widening the eligibility for CERB to different groups. And, we still need to find that fix for students and, a few other groups. But, I think we're doing a lot of good things. Calls like this are of utmost importance to us as government. So we can, huddle, go back to the proper departments, the proper experts, and then come back with tweaks and fixes. So, we're all doing the best we can. We are in extraordinary times. And, I'm very, very proud that we are getting money flowing, whether it's through CERB, the GST, the CCB, or what have you. So, it's a work in progress. And as long as we stay focused, especially in the Greater St. John area, we're going to be able to come up with fixes. We need to identify where the fires are burning, put them out, and, focus on how we're going to rebuild. And I thank you very much. I thank the minister for coming on today.
Thank you, Wayne. And again, thank you so much for all of your efforts. I know that, again, you and your staff are working tirelessly, and we're speaking with members constantly who comment that, you know, how hard you're working on everyone's behalf. So thank you for that. Before I turn it over to Deirdre to close, I would like to again mention some of my partners on here. We've got Ron and all of his team from Economic Development, Nancy from Uptown St. John, our ACOA friends as well. So we really do have a strong team here on the ground to help you, Minister Joly, as well as you, MP Wayne Long, to move this forward for our region. Now I'll turn it over to Deirdre, the chair of the chamber.
David, if I could say a couple of words just before.
Absolutely.
Before Deirdre. So thank you, Wayne, for these great comments and for all the work you're doing. Thank you also to Renee, who's on the line. Folks, like, before being in politics, I was an entrepreneur like all of you, and my spouse is a small business owner. And I see him trying, like you, find out what's the best for the subsidy, what are the options and all. And I know these are very anxious times, and I know these are very stressful times for all of you. But my word to you is this. The economy is based on direct data like supply and demand and inventories, and that's how our financial markets work. But the 2/3 of financial markets are also based on consumer confidence. And the importance of confidence and emotions right now is fundamental. More we're able to show that we know that the recovery will be there, that it is brighter on the other side of the shore, the better. And so my word to you is we're there to help, to help you cross the bridge through different measures. Let's work with David and his team. Let's work with the chamber, because more you guys organize, better we can be at our job by tweaking things and making sure to adapt it to your own realities. But let's also make sure that we all meet on the other side of the shore, and that we can continue to support a strong and vibrant St. John. So keep it up. You guys are doing a great job, and we're there to help.
Thank you. Deirdre?
Thank you, Minister Joly, for reaching out and connecting with the St. John Region Chamber of Commerce, and for the productive discussions. And the Chamber looks forward to continuing this dialogue with yourself, with MP Wayne Long, and other members of the federal government. And thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule today to join us.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Thank you, everyone.
And let's make sure we can do this maybe in a couple of weeks to see how.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.